I'm Jim Straw. I'm the chairman of the Young Voters for the President here at UCLA. And
why don't you also introduce me that way on?
Okay. And I would very much like to thank you and welcome you here to come and hear Senator Buckley. For those of you who have more questions or would like to volunteer to do work for the President on Election Day, we have a table in the back of the room. Now I'd like to introduce a very competent program director, Jeff Grunfeld.
Jeff, yeah. The election of James Buckley to the United States Senate from New York was one of the ironies of the 1970 election. Defeating both Republican and Democratic opponents, Buckley became the first candidate of New York ever to be elected to the Senate from a third party in 30 years. Born March 9, 1923 in New York City, he majored in English literature at Yale. After serving as a naval ROTC officer in World War II, Buckley graduated from Yale Law School in 1949. Although considered a member of the Nixon team, Senator Buckley voted against the Lockheed loan guarantee, claiming such government intervention would erode free competition. Buckley also introduced legislation to cut off economic aid to any country which failed to take steps to halt the importation of drugs. Meaning narcotics. He has taken a special interest in problems concerning preservation of the natural environment. Clayton Dubois described him in the New York Times Magazine as possessing that kind of natural warmth and good humor Richard Nixon could only dream of. Would you join me in welcoming Ms. Senator Buckley? This is a lavalier mic, and you just attach it and wear it.
Okay. Okay, let's hope this thing works. Fine. Well, I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm especially delighted that this is going to be a question and answer format, because I think that that is the best way to air views, get opinions, and so on. Also, you can't duck the hard ones. But I would like to unburden myself of just a few general observations before we do get started. We have a terrible tendency in our society to categorize and oversimplify. We tend to compartmentalize our population, and then we indulge in all kinds of generalizations, out of which comes a stereotype. And I think that young Americans have been among the greatest victims of this tendency, and I think it's unfair to the nation, but most particularly, it's terribly unfair to people in your generation. I was particularly struck by this phenomenon in my own campaign. I ran in 1970, and which was just in the aftermath of all of the campus disorders following the Cambodian incursion. One of my opponents, Charlie Goodell, had tried to capitalize on what was then called the youth movement, and his sideburns came down 2 or 3 notches, and his cuffs expanded out, and he would be it was in the forefront of all kind of protest movements and so on. Yet, as soon as we got organized, the press was astonished to see that I had more young men and women at high school and college age working in my headquarters around the state than my 2 opponents combined, which led me to believe that the young people are pretty much like other people, that they have different points of view, different enthusiasms, different interests, and that it is totally wrong to try to put them in a neat cubbyhole or a neat mental picture. But what is it that young people do have? They are strong on energy, they are strong on idealism, they are as yet unfettered, unpreoccupied by the business of the 9 to 5, the earning of a living, the family responsibilities, which tends to close too many of our population and having them focus on their immediate activities. Your horizons are open, your time is open. This is what's going for you. I think what you are short in, and it's nothing that can be blamed on anyone, it's just the natural process of thing, and that is experience. You just haven't been around enough years to build up that kind of body of intuitive knowledge of the interaction of human beings, of situations and so on, which is part of the developing, maturing process. It's the reason why a brilliant guy getting out of law school is going to be a better lawyer 10 years later than he is as he gets out of law school, simply because he has seen of his profession in operation. He has gotten the basis on which to draw judgments. Now, I think that one area where society has, in our country, is letting you down. It has to do with that which gives you a substitute for experience as you develop your own life contacts. What I'm referring to specifically are those seats of moral and ethical judgment, which traditionally has been wrapped up in religion. Certainly are the great reservoirs of truths outside of human beings, outside of the human nature, are at base religious, however you define religion, how you ever define God, but at least it's something that's beyond us as individuals. Each one of us needs that. Every society needs it. It needs a goal. And to the extent that we are fracturing or underscoring or denigrating these sources of ethical value, to that extent, I think it makes it harder for people growing up in America today to have firm moorings, to be part of a continuing process. The other lack, I think, is that we seem to be downgrading history. And it is, after all, what history is the recorded record of man's experience in trying to cope with the problems that humanity has had to face in the context of civilization from immemorial time. We're part of a continuum. None of us can start all over again in a vacuum without repeating all the mistakes that have gone before us. I think in particular, in this country, it is important to our understanding of our own system, our understanding of our governmental system, economic system, to have some better understanding than many schools now give of exactly what it went into, philosophically I'm talking about, in terms of the structure of our government and our ideals. Now, I think we all share the same ideal, and that is the achievement of a society which can nurture human freedom and which can give the maximum expression to that human freedom while having a cohesive society that just doesn't wander off into all kinds of, which doesn't degenerate into something unorganizable. There also, we believe in equality of opportunity. The American dream or attempt has been to achieve a society where each individual has the opportunity of making the most of what's within him, to take risks, and if there is success, to enjoy the benefits of that success. Now, of course, this is nothing unique to the United States. What is unique to the United States, I believe, is that when our nation was put together, it was done with an insight into human nature and into human history, which has made it possible for something to be constructed which has lasted as a free society longer than any other constitutional democracy in recorded history. We're an ancient, matured experiment. We're a continuing experiment, an ongoing experiment. But I do believe that without that historical base, it is much more difficult to understand the bases of our institutions, to understand how best to correct them, to understand how best to avoid repeating mistakes that have destroyed free societies in the past. So anyway, this is, I have now unloaded my observations as a whole. I think I've been exemplarily unpartisan at this point. But this is a presidential campaign. I am frankly here in connection with a last week tour of California to do my bit for a team I believe in, and I now throw myself open to the wolves. Yeah, you're talking about that, what I believe to be a disgraceful situation in that one school where 31 black kids have been frozen out day after day after day. I think this is something that nobody can be proud of. And I think, however, it is the sort of thing that we run the risk of stirring up when there is an attempt in the educational system to pursue a wholly theoretical objective that I think has very little grounding in practical knowledge. The whole idea of busing to achieve a predetermined racial mix is that it encourages good education, educational opportunity, quality of that. I think that among the results is that you misdirect the resources available to education, and you have the opportunity of stirring up the worst in men, as has occurred there.
You were talking earlier about morality coming from someplace with that. If the presidency has assumed the kind of role that a lot of people think it has, is kind of dispensing some kind of morality or being an object to look at for some kind of moral direction, can the kind of lack of morality that I see in the Nixon administration with the Watergate, with the grain deal, and a lot of these things, and kind of just, and back to Johnson too, who's a Democrat, and the credibility gaps and all that. But I think that is there some connection between that kind of, eroding away of morality in places of leadership to the kind of just baseless or morally bankrupt actions of the white people in New York who were out stoning kids?
Well, you've assumed certain things from in terms of grain deals and Watergate incidents, which I won't concede, that there is a command responsibility and command guilt. I just number one, there's no doubt that at least 7 people are directly implied in an outrageous exercise in vandalism, illegal use of bugs, and so on. They have been subjected to the grand jury procedure. A grand jury has the broadest possible sources of inquiry, a total getting of evidence under sealed doors under the on the basis that this way you can get witnesses to tell all, and as a result of that, indictments have been let out. From a practical political point of view, more morality aside, and I think incidentally that moral politics is good politics, but this strikes me, this Watergate enterprise, as something that was so totally irrational, so totally bound to be non-productive, that I cannot believe that the people either at the top of re-elect or the people or the president could possibly have been involved in it.
Well,
now,
beyond that, what about the grain deal? What about?
I was getting to the grain deal.
Go on to the carpet manufacturers.
Yeah. Well, I think with a whole audience of this sort, on the grain deal, there is, frankly, I've examined the thing with great care. I refer you to a magazine called National Review that had a whole, question and answers. But there was, I think, there was a lot of evidence of stupidity in terms of not understanding the implications of the huge, the Russians were able to cover up the extent of their demand. The fact is that sales were negotiated. They were negotiated at the then market price for export of U.S. Grains under the same ground rules that apply to our exports of grain to other countries. The farming community had as much knowledge as other communities that something was in the wind. They didn't know the size of it. There was no advance leak of the sort that could allow people to profit and so on.
What about the guy who used to work for Butts, who now works for Purina, and Purina ended up with most of the deal? I mean, that's just the empirical evidence. There seems to
but I want to read the right paragraph. No, I think it's unfortunate that you had that thing because it gives rise to this kind of speculation. But in the terms of the, but in terms of the mechanics, in terms of the mechanics of the negotiation, in terms of the business, you have grain middlemen the way you have middlemen in anything else that is a raw material.
The problem here is the grain middlemen are also the government middlemen, and that's what causes the whole controversy with grain.
No. Honestly, the cause and effect there just doesn't follow. It just doesn't follow.
Well, it all depends what magazine.
Mr. Buckley, Richard Nixon claims to espouse the work ethic, and yet under his administration, the welfare rolls and unemployment rolls have drastically increased. Meanwhile, those of us who are working and are on the payrolls find our wages frozen or seriously controlled while our prices go up and up and up. Something seems inconsistent here about Mr. Nixon espousing the work ethic.
I'm not sure that I follow the cause and effect there, but
I would say this, first of all, welfare rolls have expanded enormously, and I think that this is an indication of the inherent defects of
in the welfare system, especially a lot of the ground rules imposed by HEW that make it terribly difficult for states like California and New York to apply common sense proposals to see that those who are in actual need are getting the help, and those who could work are required to work, so as not...
Jobs.
Okay.
Unemployment's awful high right about now.
Okay, we're taking these things one at a time, right?
They're related.
Number two, we've got an unemployment of 4.3 million, I think, at the present time, up from 2.5. I see the McGovern commercials, from 2.5 a few years ago. In the last 4 years, we have had two things happen. One is that we have chopped our military by about 1 million. We've chopped defense-related jobs by more than 1 million. At the same time, we've had the influx of the World War II baby boom going into the employment market. We have, in fact, in the last year, added 2.4 million people to our labor force. Given the retrenchment in the war situation, and given the unusual amount of accretion in our employment rolls, I think that we've done a remarkable job of digesting all the people. We've never had so many people employed in the country as we have today, and we've never, and right now, their pay is buying more than it has in the past.
I question that.
No.
As a worker whose pay is buying less than it was a year ago and much less than it was 3 years ago.
We're talking on the national averages, and I don't know what your particular situation is.
I comply with statistics.
Okay.
I don't know anybody whose pay, any working man whose pay is buying more than it was 1, 2, or 3 years ago.
Well,
Perhaps the corporations with their record profits are.
I don't know the situation in this county, and this is, of course, one of the areas where you have a pocket of
I'm referring to
unemployment.
other parts of California and other parts of the country
I'm talking
as well.
about New York. How's that?
No, I'm talking about California, Georgia, and Washington.
The national figures are there. If you want to question statistics, fine, but then show where they're at fault. The fact is that the average wage earner today is able to buy more than he was a year ago. Now, in terms, you're talking about wages being frozen while prices go up. Prices were going up at about over 6% the time the president came in, as a result of trying to fight a war and do all the domestic things at the same time. The rate of inflation is now down to about, I'm talking in terms of the consumer, is down at about 3%. This, to my way of thinking, is substantial progress.
Last month it went up 0.5% nationwide. That translates to an annual rate of 6%.
These things have zigs and zags, and maybe next month it'll be down. You have to take the meaningful blocks of time, and in point of fact, over the past 12 months, the increase has been in the area of 3%. Now the wage controls allow wage increases on the average. These things are all on the average of about 5%. Maybe your particular, where you're working, has not been carved in for that. Apparently not. But in point of fact, the what is allowed as a wage increase under these controls, which incidentally I don't like worth a darn, it has exceeded the rate of increase on consumer goods.
Sir?
Oh, excuse me.
First of all, I'd like to welcome you to UCLA. I think it's nice. We need to have more people of your political philosophy here to discuss with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
My question really has to deal with your comments about experience. From about the time I was in the 4th grade, I started to learn about corruption in government, particularly at that time with grant administration. And it seems like every year as I get older, I find out more and more about corruption that happened 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago. And in regards to this current election, I find that there are quite a few things I have fear for. For instance, in this country it is permissible to forgive Cali and not do anything, for instance, for Angela Davis. For instance, the Watergate issue of wiretapping. 3 years ago I was working for a company which was investigated by the FDA, and there was extensive wiretapping done. It was discovered. The FBI was called in. As soon as the FBI found out that the FDA was doing the wiretapping, all the evidence disappeared and nothing else was said. We have, for instance, in every election there's usually, in every party, people criticizing the president or people who are being elected. There isn't a single major Republican candidate criticizing the Republican administration. I find this fearful. For instance, in Las Vegas, the major powers in Las Vegas, they support Kennedy when he was running for president. They support Nixon when he's running for president. They support Governor Brown when he was running for governor. They support Governor Reagan when he's running for governor. And one final point is that this issue about where the money goes and taxation, every rich Republican candidate, especially dealing with former Secretary of Treasury Connolly and all the rich people.
He's a Democrat.
Okay, that's right. But there are a tremendous amount of people who have money and power who can go out and talk about welfare and civil rights and then turn right around and not say anything about the fact that they're getting $50,000 or $100,000 not to grow crops and then write it off for income tax and not pay a single penny. For instance, one of the major Republican supporters with John Wayne, he gets a fantastic amount of money from the government for doing nothing and then doesn't pay very much income tax on the money he gets. And the same with Governor Reagan. Really what I'm trying to say is put it all together. What am I going to find out in 20 years when I'm more experienced? That's my whole setup.
Well, I'm trying to formulate out of what you said a question that I can focus on. I'm not saying this in any kind of style ways. I think what you have expressed is important and expresses the kind of concerns that I think we've got to cope with. First of all, let's get at the business of the whole tax picture. The tax rules have been, and I hate to sort of use partisan labels, but the fact is that the Congress of the United States has been controlled by the Democrats every year but 4 in the last 40. These tax write-offs, deductions, credits, and all the rest of it were put into the tax structure because the people at the time felt that they served legitimate needs. and legitimate objectives and compensated for legitimate business losses, risks, and the rest of it. I think that this kind of a structure needs to be re-examined periodically to make sure that the changing conditions don't require changing treatment. But I don't think there's any reason to criticize someone as in any way morally bankrupt if he's going by if he's following the Internal Revenue Code to the letter, utilizing the provisions exactly as they were intended in most cases. Take your tax exempts, for example. The purpose there, number one, is a constitutional problem in terms of the power to tax, the power to destroy. Number two, it was felt desirable to create incentives for the financing at low cost of state and local debt. Okay, so that the device of tax exemption was agreed to. People have many investment choices, and somebody can take $100,000 and go out and buy AT&T and get 7% bonds, or buy the municipality of Los Angeles water something or other, pay and get 3% free of taxes. He's given up. He's given up four.
One of the points I was trying to make was that we seem to have to play the political game in order to be morally corrupt. As soon as
I don't think this is a question of politics. I think this is a question
what do we do with our money? What does Governor Reagan, now that he's governor of California, what does he do with his money to change the tax structure? What do we do, for instance, with why does the Republican administration support for money from Las Vegas, or accept it willingly? Why, for instance, is there not any change of money, for instance, any money spent on Angela Davis and money spent on William Kelly? I mean, to me, I agree with you about the tax structure. I agree with you about the past history about it, and I agree with you about how the how people can obey the law and escape paying taxes. But the point is, nothing is being done now. I frankly feel guilty, for instance, when I see my black brothers or my Chicanos, and I know that they're being screwed, and there's nothing that I can do about it. Why isn't, for instance, isn't a single Republican candidate speaking out for any of the disadvantaged people or the people who are being oppressed, particularly with the race issue, specifically here on this campus with Angela Davis? And to make the comparison to William Kelly, to me, it just floors me. It floors me that not a single Republican candidate has voiced opposition to President Nixon. And I know that Percy is just waiting to say something. I know that Governor Rockefeller is trying to say something, but everybody's being told to be quiet. Why?
No, I think that what you're running into is a judgment as to which two alternatives make sense for this country.
And there's nothing sinister. No one's being throttled or coerced into going out and going to bat for the Nixon administration. This represents their conscious decision that given the two alternatives facing this country, and this is the practical here and now, that the Nixon administration is working in the right direction. And I think, incidentally, the Nixon administration has a great record in connection of helping the very people you're talking about in a manner that makes absolute sense, and that is to help with economic opportunity, do away with paternalism and all of these programs that we saw in the Great Society that have ended up doing very little for black Americans, for Chicanos. The important areas to help out is to develop the ability to climb up the economic ladder. There has been more positive progress under the Nixon administration than the two previous administrations combined in terms of economic help to businesses, channeling governmental purchases in these various communities, help with training, all of these things.
But for every dollar that's being spent in this field, for every dollar, there's so many other dollars going in, for instance, for espionage and police under detective work. And for instance, as I understand it, UCLA has turned down X number of dollars for riot control and all kinds of modern police weapons. I mean, to me, it seems like for every dollar, yes, it's true that there are more women in the federal government, but if you read MS thinks it's just tokenism. Yes, it's true.
It's very large tokenism. very large, and I think sincere. Yeah.
Well, can you make one comment, for instance, about Callie and Angela Davis? I mean,
Okay. I think Angela Davis received a fair trial. I believe there is the evidence there that required her to be indicted, and she is the beneficiary of a system which goes as far out to try to protect the interests of the innocent as any that exist in the earth today. I think she's a prime exhibit number one of the fairness of our system, of our criminal system. Why was she fired?
she's been taken away from a university. Lieutenant Callie has been convicted of a crime, and yet he was given extremely comfortable quarters. If you were to, for instance, to have a psychologist or a psychiatrist talk to either one of them, you would find that Lieutenant Callie is much more at home. He feels like he's where he wants to be. If you talk to Angela Davis, she's not where she wants to be. She's been taken out of her rightful environment.
I don't know. Yeah.
First of all, I want to say that I think it's kind of ironic that you should come here and tell us that we may not quite have the maturity to make certain judgments, but that most of us worked for you in your campaign. But
Touché.
secondly, I would like to take issue with the point of the fact that Democrats have controlled the Congress during all these tax reform issues. I think you'll find that conservative Democrats and Republicans, in many of these at times, band together, shall we say, and that either many of the things that people who intend to reform the tax laws are interested in either go by the wayside or else have to be compromised in order to get any kind of reform at all entered into the tax structure. And thirdly, I saw your brother on a TV show recently, and everybody oohed and awed like they usually do whenever he talks. And he said that the problem was that the three restraints that we used to have in the good old days, social and legal, and I believe the other one was moral, no, divine. That's right. I think he was talking about himself, but I wasn't. But, mainly moral and legal restraints have kind of gotten merged, or should we say the social and the legal. And he said that, sure, it's okay to have a liberal obscenity law, but that in the old days, you weren't a very nice man if you still sold what we might call dirty books. What I would like to know is, if that's the case, why, even though there are these loopholes, shall we say, why are you such a nice guy if you take all of them? You just said that it was, very legal and everything to take them, but why does everyone take them if they're still not very nice things, like pornography?
Well, you're jumping to the conclusion that these things are necessarily bad things. I don't buy that, frankly. I think a lot of them need revision, a lot of them need re-examination, but I believe that people who are sincerely involved in trying to do the proper thing and to have the impact of the tax situation constructive felt that let's take one that was advocated by President Kennedy, the tax credit for a new investment in plant and equipment. This is one of the ones that George McGovern is talking about. Let's get rid of it. It's a loophole. What this particular device does, is recognize the fact that for the United States economy to be competitive, for it to produce jobs, to produce employment, it's got to be efficient. The way you increase your efficiency is by updating your whole manufacturing apparatus.
Okay, let me see. Perhaps I used a bad term in saying that they were all bad things. I'm not saying that every single loophole doesn't have a purpose. Let me say that
a loophole is one of these words.
Okay, every kind of whatever you however you want to phrase it. However, it does seem that these people who are paying absolutely no taxes and are making a lot of money And I think, will you recognize that there are people who make a lot of money who don't pay any taxes?
Yeah, about 6 of them, I think.
Well, I would take issue with that. Whatever, that they can see that perhaps they should be paying some tax, and that maybe it isn't right to take every single kind of write-off which is available to them.
Which was the consensus of the Congress a couple of years ago, hence the 1970, I think it was the 1970 law, which now requires a minimum tax irrespective of whether or not under different provisions of the Internal Revenue Law you have no tax due. You are aware of that?
Touche. One more question on the Watergate. I believe your brother refers to it as a caper. I'm not sure.
I don't. I think it's
okay.
I think that makes it a frank.
Okay. What I was wondering is, like, for example, Senator Goldwater is very quick to write this off and say that this is something that's all happened before. But I think that we can see that something like this has not really happened before. That there is some evidence that there was sabotage involved in some of these campaigns, and that there are people actually missing. A gentleman named Salmaggi or something like that can't be. Okay, Segretti cannot be found. Do you have any? Do you know where he is?
No.
Thank you.
As a conservative, I've been having trouble with in the last couple of years reconciling what I see to be between my political principles heretofore held to and dealing with the increasing awareness of the manifestations of population density and population pressure and just the absolute amount of numbers of people on the face of the earth. Would you comment, please?
Yeah. I think we've got a very, very serious and real problem, and it is more of a real problem in other parts of the world than it is in the United States. By any indicia of Western Europe, we're underpopulated, and I'd like to see us that way, continue that way. Now, then the question is, what do you, and incidentally, it's not so much a question of population in the country as density of population and the ability to handle the wastes of human activities. There's fewer continents as unpopulated as Australia, yet Sydney, Australia has very, very acute pollution problems. Now, what do you do about growth in population? I think education. It's a thing that people can will to control. In point of fact, as a result of the enormous amount of education that's going on in this country, we see that we are, in fact, right on the verge of population zero. And each time somebody projects what the population of the United States is going to be in the year the year 2000, we've dropped 20 or 30 millions. One phenomenon that has been lost sight of, and is one that I was conscious of when I was growing up, was that in Western Europe in the late 1930s, there was enormous concern because populations were declining. And this was before the pill, before all kinds of other things. But there was something in the will to family formation, what was desired, what was considered socially acceptable, or the other pressures, financial pressures on raising a family, which caused a shrinkage in fertility. So I think it's a question that can be handled. I think it's a question which we are coming to grips with in this country, and I think it can be handled in a manner that is consistent with the beliefs of all elements of our population.
I'm worried about the size of that.
Well, right now, the people who are getting married are having pretty close to those 2 children that we see in all those lovely posters. Now, the one thing we can do in terms of time factor is either euthanasia, which I would discount, or a moratorium on babies, which I think people wouldn't cooperate with. I'm told that we have time for 2 short questions.
I've been waiting.
The question was, where did I stand on the abortion appeal in New York? This I'll give you a very short answer. There's no way of giving an in-between sized answer on this one. I personally do not favor abortion on demand.
Mr. Buckley? Over here. Mr. Buckley, given the nature of America's theory of defense of being given the nature of America's defense theory, in other words, that we will keep a position of being able to destroy anybody who would attempt to destroy us, how would you reconcile, or is there reconciliation of President Nixon's policy of saying that we will never be number 2 in defense capabilities, when that type of statement in no way coincides with the policy we maintain, and he knows it. And he also said that, as Senator McGovern said, he would cut down our defense spending. He said that Senator McGovern's proposals would not only cut away fat, but would cut away muscle. In that statement, he admitted that there was fat in the budget, in the military budget. Where would he cut? Why does he make a statement which goes against the policy that he knows of? And why does he mislead the people to think that to be safe in our country, we have to have the most number of missiles, the most number of airplanes, the most number of everything else, when he knows that we have what is important is our destructive power, which we have a projected 4-to-1 edge over Russia.
First of all, point out that he just signed an agreement which for the next 5 years cuts us below parity in terms of missiles and nuclear launching submarines. The policy that you're talking about is a strategic weapons policy, assured destruction, the whole concept being that we will be able to absorb a first nuclear strike and still return enough devastation to obliterate the attacking country, and therefore we have this balance of terror that preserves keeps us from ever having that nuclear holocaust. But there are all kinds of other dimensions of warfare, of threat. And the President 2 or 3 years ago pleaded to the Congress to give him a greater flexibility than this business of obliterating entire cities. As we have, as a matter of national policy, refused to give ourselves that ultimate accuracy that would enable us to go after military installations or silos as opposed to populations and industrial masses. So I don't think there's anything inconsistent in saying that, yes, our strategic posture ultimately depends on the assured capacity to wipe out another country. But then, if there is a nuclear standoff, we need to have parity or be second to none in terms of the conventional forces and in terms of tactical nuclear weapons in order to meet the sort of situation that we could have in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Middle East. The plausibility of America's mutual security agreements with NATO, for example, and others, presupposes that the United States will be able to function effectively in a situation which is less than apocalyptic. Keeping our conventional forces to that point where that they could be used as a effective instruments of foreign policy was something that started under Kennedy. But you said they just signed those agreements with the SALT talks, which we reduced our numbers of missiles and submarines. But the fact is, our nerve capability is such that we have a 4-to-1 destructive power. We presently have projected through the agreement. Yeah, we presently have closer to parity than 4-to-1. That 4-to-1 involves all kinds of advanced bombers and so on, and other things that have to be reloaded and reloaded, which can't be launched all at one time. But there isn't a single analyst of repute that I know of that doesn't feel that at the end of this 5-year interim period, that the Russians will have achieved that same nerve capacity, at which case their full weight power will enable them to translate the figures in in the other direction towards the United States. We're going into several questions, which I'll be happy to do, but I'm told that... Okay. Well, so we have one more question? Because yours didn't count, really. Because I didn't count. The question was, so the Senator By said there was a chance that the Republicans would get control. Small chance. What did I think? I think that if we have a very large Nixon vote, say 60% plus, that there is a good chance that enough Republicans would be brought in to change the control of the Senate. There are all kinds of marginal races in Oklahoma, New Mexico, Georgia, North Carolina, which are hanging on a thread, and I think whether or not it'll tip into the Republican side will depend in large measure on the size of the presidential vote. Thank you all.